but also in the Office 365 arena. My name is Mel Wilcock. I am one of the licensing specialists and commercial executives here at Bytes. In this session, I'm going to be joined by my colleague Glenn, who is one of our senior licensing and SAM consultants. Just to highlight, this session is going to be recorded and there will be some poll questions at the end. If you wouldn't mind answering those, we'd be grateful for that. What we are going to be doing is in regards to question and answer sessions, we're going to be doing that session at the end of this presentation. If you could put yourselves on mute for the duration, that would be great. Thank you very much. So during this session, I will be covering off the Azure Hybrid Benefit and Azure Reservations, at which point I will then pass over to Glenn, who will be providing a demo on Quantum and providing details around our Cloud Essential service. As I said, we will then follow up with a question and answer session. So please feel free in that time to ask us any questions on the subjects that we have covered. So if we start by looking at the Azure Hybrid Benefit. So the Azure Hybrid Benefit is a software assurance benefit for Windows Server and SQL Server that allows customers to utilize their existing on-premise license investment when they move into Azure. By using the Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server, customers can save up to 40% on the pay-as-you-go price when licensing virtual machines in Azure. So the question is, how does it work? And here we can cover off how Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server is calculated. In Azure, both standard and data center editions receive up to 2 virtual machines per license. For every 16 core license of Windows Server Data Center purchased, you can license up to 2 virtual machines and up to 16 cores. So you could license one 16-core virtual machine or 2 8-core virtual machines. With Windows Server Data Center, it allows you to run virtual machines both on-premise and in Azure. With Windows Server Standard, the rules are the same as Windows Server Data Center in terms of what they allow. However, you can only run them on premises or in Azure. That is, unless it's for migration, at which point you can run it simultaneously on premises and in Azure for a period of 180 days. At the end of that 180 days, Microsoft will deem that those licenses have been assigned to Azure. If they need to be assigned back to on-premises, they can do, but they do fall into the reassignment rights of 90 days. If you are licensing or you choose to license a virtual machine with Windows Server using the Azure Hybrid Benefit, when you go into the admin portal or the Azure Enterprise portal, there is an option that you have to tick to show that you're using the Azure Hybrid Benefit. So that helps in the event of Microsoft if they want to know whether you're actually using the licenses. It also probably gives you a good view, because there should be reports that you can pull off which show whether you're using the Azure Hybrid Benefit on those virtual machines or not. So it gives a good understanding of what's been assigned a Windows Server license using Azure Hybrid Benefit, or whether you might be paying for that license on a pay-as-you-go basis. So if we now look at the Azure Hybrid Benefit for SQL Server, so again, customers can save costs on SQL Server that they have installed on virtual machines in Azure, but it can also be used for Azure SQL Database and SQL Managed Instances. So we can now look at how Azure Hybrid Benefit for SQL Server is calculated. Now this slide shows the details from the product term, so I appreciate it is quite wordy, but in summary, if you're wanting to license individual virtual machines with SQL, then the rights you get depends on the addition of SQL you would like installed on your VM, and also the addition of SQL that you have purchased. If you have purchased SQL Server Enterprise per core and want to install SQL Server Enterprise on the virtual machine, then you will need to allocate 1 core license to 1 vCPU. If you want to install SQL Server Standard, you will need to allocate 1 core license to 4 vCPUs. If you've purchased SQL Server Standard per core and want to install SQL Server Enterprise on the virtual machine, then you'll need to allocate 4 core licenses to 1 vCPU. If you want to install SQL Server Standard, you will need to allocate 1 core license to 1 vCPU. Note that there is still, as there is in regards to the general licensing for SQL anyway, a minimum requirement of 4 core licenses per VM. So that is still a requirement when you move your SQL into Azure using the Azure Hybrid benefit. And you'll also see that there are different ratios of core licenses to vCores if you use Azure Hybrid benefit to license SQL databases and SQL managed instances. SQL does also come with migration rights, which allow you to install in Azure and on premises for 180 days to allow for workloads to be migrated. At the end of those 180 days, those licenses again will be deemed assigned to Azure. So I guess the question is, we're looking at optimizing costs. What are the savings that you could potentially make from using the Azure Hybrid benefit for Windows Server and SQL Server? So on the left-hand side here, we can see an estimated cost of a virtual machine running in Azure with SQL Server Enterprise and Windows Server being consumed via pay-as-you-go and not utilising the Azure Hybrid benefit. We can then see that by using Azure Hybrid benefit for Windows Server only, it does reduce the cost by a small amount, but then when utilising Azure Hybrid benefit for SQL Server Enterprise and Windows Server and only paying for the compute element, you can save up to 85%. Finally, as the Azure Hybrid benefit is a software assurance benefit, you would also need to make sure that you still have active software assurance on those on-premises licenses, and there would be a cost associated with that. But that is something that we here at Bytes can help you with. So let's now take a look at Azure Reservations. So Azure Reservations are available on certain products in Azure, such as virtual machines, blob storage, managed disks, and SQL database. Reservations can help you by providing a discount if you make some decisions at the point of purchase for workloads for consistent resources. In this session, I'm going to cover off Azure Virtual Machine Reserved Instances. So, what are Azure Reserved Instances? So Azure Virtual Machine Reserved Instances are a way to purchase compute at a discounted rate when opting to pay upfront for it. There are some decisions that need to be made at the time of purchase. So one thing you will need to decide is whether you want to purchase it for 1 or 3 years. You also need to decide what size virtual machine instance that you would like to reserve. You also need to know what region you want the virtual machine to reside in. So what location, what Azure region. And you'd also need to decide whether you would like it assigned at company or at department level. We've had a look at the Azure Hybrid benefit for Windows Server, but we can now look at the savings that can be made when used alongside virtual machine reserved instances. Apologies. So you can see from this diagram, the left-hand side pile of coins highlights the cost for paying for the compute and Windows Server element pay-as-you-go. So that's with no reserved instances. That's not using Azure Hybrid benefit. That is simply you paying for it pay-as-you-go, as you may be doing currently. By using reserved instances for the compute, but paying for Windows Server license pay-as-you-go, you can save up to 72% of the cost. But when you combine the reserved instances and Azure Hybrid benefit together, you can save up to 82% of the pay-as-you-go cost. You can still purchase on-premises Windows Server licenses to use solely in Azure under the Azure Hybrid benefit. You don't necessarily just have to be using them already. So it might still be cheaper, as long as you still have software assurance on new licenses, to purchase the licenses as you would normally and use them in Azure via the Azure hybrid benefit rather than paying by pay-as-you-go. But this is where our quantum tool can help, and that is what Glenn will cover a bit later in this session. Now, the savings do vary based on the VM family that you have purchased reserved instances for, and do note that reserved instances aren't available on all VM families. So I have given some examples here, but as an example, the A family series and the G family series virtual machines do not allow for reserved instances, and you would have to pay the full pay-as-you-go price in those cases if you're using any of those size virtual machines. Here I've put down a range of different sized VMs, the cost of the compute with and without Windows, and also the reserved instance cost with and without utilising the Azure hybrid benefit. For the B2MS VM, there is a 42% discount when purchasing a 1-year RI and a 51% discount for a 3-year RI. When adding Azure hybrid benefit to that, you can save up to 73% on the 1-year RI and 88% for a 3-year RI. Now, I'm not sure whether you're aware, but you can calculate an estimated cost for a reserved instance with or without Azure hybrid benefit using the Azure Calculator. So the Azure Calculator is available to everybody to use. You can simply Google it and it will come up with the Azure Calculator if you haven't got it saved as a favourite. And you can go in and select virtual machines. You can select your region, your instance size, whether you want it with Windows or not. And then as you can see where I've circled in red, the option for a 1-year reserved cost or a 3-year reserved cost. If you also tick the Azure hybrid benefit button, then that will give you the monthly cost, including the Azure hybrid benefit as well. So if you opt to purchase reserved instances, it does still allow for flexibility. So for example, you can reassign reserved instances if they need to be aligned to a different department or the whole company. You can exchange reserved instances for a reserved instance of the same or higher value as the one you no longer need. And you can also cancel reserved instances at any time. So when assigning a reserved instance in an agreement, they can be assigned at enrolment level or at subscription level. This can be changed if required. Note that there are the reserved instances cannot be transferred from one agreement to another. In order to do that, the reserved instance would need to be cancelled and repurchased under the other agreement. So where you might see that is, as an example, you might have an existing enterprise agreement or server and cloud enrolment with Azure on it. If you set up reserved instances under those agreements, they don't align to the anniversary dates on those agreements, which I know isn't overly helpful, but they will run for the full 12 or the full 36 months, depending on what option you have gone for. When you open a new agreement or start a new agreement or move to a different agreement, those reserved instances will stay where they are, at which point, when they are due to expire, you would then purchase them under your new agreement, unless, of course, you cancelled them. So reserved instances can be exchanged for another reserved instance at any time. So if you decide actually you're changing your reserved instance, then you can, or your VMs, you can change where that reserved instance is going. So if you change it to a different instance, then we can get that exchanged. The time remaining will serve as a credit applied to your new reserved instance purchase. And one thing to note is that the new reserved instance purchase must be of equal or greater value than the prorated amount. So you can't exchange it for a reserved instance that is smaller than the instance that you're currently purchasing your reserved instance on. And again, the new RI purchase will be for the full 1 or 3 year term. So as an example here, a year 1 reserved instance is purchased. In month 8, they change it for another reserved instance, and that starts a new 12-month term. So it's not co-termed for for 4 months, it starts a new 12-month term from that point. And you'll be charged at that point for the cost of the new reserved instance minus the credit from the original reserved instance, which in this case is £432. So a reserved instance can be cancelled at any time during the term, and a pro-rated credit will be provided, or refund will be provided back to the way that you purchased it originally. So whether that's under an enterprise agreement or a CSP agreement. Microsoft always said they were bringing out a 12-month early termination fee, which would be applied to the pro-rated refund. Microsoft currently do not charge this, but it is still mentioned in documentation that they might at some point. So just be mindful that at some point Microsoft might start charging this 12% early termination fee. And as we can see here, we have got the remaining prorated balance minus the fee. So they have bought a 1-year reservation. It's purchased in month 8, it's cancelled in month 8, and they'll be prorated for those remaining 4 months. One additional thing to note about cancelling reservations is that although they can be cancelled at any time, there is a limit as to the number you can cancel in an annual period. So you can only cancel up to $50,000 worth per year, which works out roughly £37,000. So as a recap, here are some of the characteristics of a reservation. So you determine whether you want to purchase them for either a 1 or a 3-year term. Payments can be made upfront or they can be paid monthly. It can be assigned to a single subscription or shared across all subscriptions. Once purchased, it will be applied automatically to existing resources. So if you should have the resources set up already, it will then automatically apply to those resources that are running at the same in the same location, the same size instance. It can be used across a service or family, and exchanges and cancellations are available. And reserved instances can be purchased through CSP or enterprise agreements or directly via the web. So now let's take a look at reserved instance size flexibility. So with a reserved virtual machine instance that's optimized for instance size flexibility, the reservation you buy can apply to the virtual machine sizes in the same instance size flexibility group. So for example, if you buy a reservation for a VM size that's listed in the DS-V2 series, say something like a standard DS3V2, the reservation discount can apply to the other sizes that are listed in that same instance size flexibility group. So within the instance size flexibility group, the number of VMs the reservation discount applies to depends on the VM size you pick when you buy a reservation. And it also depends on the size of the VMs that you have running. So I'm now going to pass over to Glenn, who is going to provide a demo for Quantum and discuss Cloud Essentials.
Thanks very much, Mel. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Glenn Rogers. I sit within the Software Asset Management and Services team here at Bytes, and I have a particular focus on our cost containment and our software procurement consultancy style engagements. Before I kick off in earnest, I will apologise in advance. I have a very annoying cough, so if I go suddenly and inexplicably silent, it's unlikely the line has dropped. I've probably just muted you out so that you don't have to hear me spluttering directly into a microphone. What I would like to do with the rest of this session is show you some of the tools and services that Bytes can provide to inform you about and enact on some of the cost optimization measures that Mel has just spoken about, and to assist in some of the decisions that you may be facing as a result of Microsoft's changes to CSP and the new commerce experience that you've probably heard about earlier today. So you bear with me 1 second. I will share my screen and show you our Quantum toolset. So Quantum is a proprietary tool that Bytes has developed to help our customers gain a better understanding of what's going on in their Office 365 tenant, their Azure AD environment, and their wider Azure tenant. It's split loosely between Quantum for 365 and Quantum for Azure, and I will show you both of those tool sets today. And I'd like to take this opportunity to point out that there is an awful lot more to Quantum in both flavors than merely cost optimization and license optimization. But given the nature of the discussion we're having today, that's very much where I'll focus. But I do want to point out that I would be kind of doing both tool sets an injustice if I didn't point out there's an awful lot more to both flavors of Quantum. We'll begin with Quantum for 365. So this is a tool that we will point at your Office 365 and your Azure AD environment to provide a number of recommendations around ways to optimize the Office 365 environment. The tool itself will provide a number of recommendations out of the box based on certain behaviors and trigger conditions. So for example, there's a recommendation here for some accounts that could potentially be converted to a shared mailbox. So they are accounts that are currently provisioned with a license, but the behavior around that account suggests that there's possibly a more cost-effective way of provisioning that account. And as with any of those recommendations, if we click on details, we'll be taken through to a list of the accounts in question, the trigger condition that's caused Quantum to make the recommendation, the recommendation itself, and an indication of what we could save by following that recommendation. Personally, I like to dig around a little bit more in the data to find specifically what I'm looking for. I'm by no means a data analyst, but if you are familiar with Power BI, then some of this filtering capability will be fairly familiar to you. What we are looking at here is a list of all of the users, or all of the accounts on the tenant, which isn't wildly useful in and of itself, but we can start to manipulate these quite quickly to get to the bottom of what we're looking for. I should point out here that this is a the particular tenant that we're looking at is a development partner of ours. We have their permission to use them as a demonstration site, and as such, all of their data is kind of obfuscated for sort of data protection reasons. If the tool is pointing at your tenant, we'd be looking at first name dot last name, etc. right now. So from here, I can start to dig into what the tool can show me from a cost optimization point of view. And what we're seeing a lot of customers use Quantum for at present is to make decisions around that new commerce experience. So CSP being molded to a model whereby you can commit for 1 or 3 years to kind of fix your pricing and achieve certain discounts, or you can pay a premium in return for flexibility for seasonal parts of the business or flexible parts of the business. So what we are very much using Quantum to do at the moment is to assist customers making those decisions around where to commit and to, I guess, prune or trim the tenant before they commit to numbers that they may sort of subsequently regret. And where organizations do favor flexibility and are willing to pay that premium, to help them make sure that they are making the most of that flexibility once they have done so. Because the last thing we would want to do is pay a premium for flexibility and then not make use of it and essentially be overpaying for licensing. So what I'm always keen to do with any customer as we onboard them into Quantum is to look for low-hanging fruit. So first things first, we're looking for quantitative changes that we can make to your licensing agreement to drive out cost. Again, particularly before making any kind of long-term commitments. So some of the things that we will initially look for will be things like disabled accounts with licenses attached. So these are accounts that somebody from IT has proactively gone in and disabled, I guess under the instruction that a user has left the business or something like that. But in doing so, have left a chargeable subscription attached to that account. So even though the account is sat there dormant and unusable, Microsoft will continue to bill for it on a monthly basis until that license is removed. And in this instance, we can see there are 11 accounts that are currently disabled with licenses attached, 9 of which have chargeable subscriptions attached to them. Also, we can look for inactive accounts, so accounts that are enabled, they are licensed but haven't shown any sign-in activity for a certain period of time. We can get an awful lot more granular than sign-in activity as well. We can look at specifically what components users are and aren't using, but for the purposes of this point, I'll just focus on sign-in activity, and I'll take this view out to 3 months because I think targeting users who haven't logged in 7 days is probably a little bit aggressive. And here we have a list of the users on the tenant who have not signed in over 3 months. So the majority of which I would think it's fairly safe to assume are quite possibly people that have left the organization, and the message hasn't got back to IT that, you know, the account can be disabled, can be removed, the license can be reharvested, etc., etc. What we've designed the tool to do is give you as much useful information in one view as possible. So when looking at a list of inactive accounts, we can sort by cost to make sure we're going after the most expensive ones first. We can see what licenses are assigned to each of these accounts. And if we scroll over to the right, we can kind of see, you know, what geographic territory does this person reside in, what's their job role, what department are they in, who is their line manager, etc., etc., so that we can investigate, you know, ASAP really, why is it that this person hasn't logged in for a certain period of time. There is a tagging engine built into the tool as well. So if we investigate, you know, a period of inactivity on an account, and it transpires that it turns out the user is on long-term sick leave or on parental leave or something like that, then we can tag them as such. Clearly, if you have an employee who's on parental leave and they're not due back until August, there's no point reminding you of that day in, day out, because it's expected behavior and that's a waste of your time. But what we can do is tag them as being on parental leave, set a custom alert and say, if they haven't logged in by the 1st of September, at that point, I need to know about it and will behave as appropriate. In addition to kind of fine tuning, you know, these initial cost savings reports, you know, the tags across both flavors of Quantum, both 365 and Azure, have a wide range of applications. So bear me 1 second. I'll perform the web browser equivalent of turning it off and turning it on again. So the tool will pull a number of tags from the tenant itself and from Azure AD, but then you can apply tags from within the tool's tagging engine. Everything that we're looking at the moment requires read-only access to the tenant. So the tool, again, both for 365 and Azure, has been designed in such a way that you can report and manipulate data from within here without the risk of turning off a production environment, cutting off a user's access or anything like that. So if you did have a cross-charging requirement in your business or something like that, and you wanted to delegate that to someone who you wouldn't necessarily want to give Office 365 admin rights to or Azure admin rights to, you can empower them to kind of run reports and what have you, and then kind of feed those back up the chain to be acted on. So for example, if this organization wanted to cross-charge based on, let's say, geography, it should be fairly easy for them to establish, you know, what is France's contribution to their enterprise agreement or CSP. And from there, cut an invoice to that entity or divvy up those costs whatever way they see fit. Also, from a license optimization point of view, we can start to look at things like more qualitative changes. So looking at the subscriptions that are assigned to your users and establishing if they are fit for purpose or if there is a more cost-effective way of licensing those users. Bear with me 1 second. As soon as I say the word quickly in any demonstration, I'm pretty sure the tool hears me and likes to give me that scrolling blue bar of death. Here we go. So from here, we can look at things like activations of desktop products. So for example, Office Professional Plus, some of the project online subscriptions, the Visio online subscriptions entitle you to run a local desktop version of that particular product. What we can see from within Quantum is if people have done so via the click to, or have activated that local desktop version via the click to run method. So essentially what we're looking for here are opportunities to move users from an expensive subscription that does include Office, potentially to one that doesn't if it transpires they do not need that local copy. Similarly with Visio and Project. You know, the kind of numbers we can see here, you know, 7 users eligible to run Visio on the desktop, only 5 have done so. Okay, the saving of 2 users there probably isn't going to set the world alight, but with the cost differential between some of those SKUs being up to 60–70%, it's always worth looking at. What we can also do from within Quantum is deep dive on a much more granular level to look at all of the micro components that make up the Office 365 suites and get a better understanding of what your users are and aren't using. So on a SKU based level, we can select something like, for example, Microsoft 365 E3, see all of the components that make up that suite and what this organization currently is and isn't using from there. Knowing this organization as I do, I've been through this exercise with them, and we've established that the M365 E3 suite is the most cost-effective way to license their usage. There is no more cost-effective way of cobbling together these particular users' requirements using smaller components. But even with that being the case, we don't have to scroll down too far here before we hit the elements of that suite that they are simply not using. So first things first, I'm always keen to understand, is there a more cost-effective way of licensing that user's requirements? And then if the answer is no, taking another look at all of these components that we have access to, but we're not currently using. Because ultimately, if you're paying for a suite from Microsoft, you are paying for this functionality. It's definitely worth looking to see if we can get more value out of that suite, particularly if we're paying a third-party vendor for similar functionality elsewhere on the estate, and there's a bill that we can offset against the Microsoft bill there. There are also, before I move on to Quantum for Azure, there are a number of other features for Quantum 365 that I won't dive into today because they kind of sit outside the realms of license and cost optimization, which is very much our theme. But just to point out, we can report on a number of sort of security related features like multi-factor authentication, enablement and adoption across the tenant, and we can dive into a number of kind of usage metrics as well around usage of mail, usage of Teams, usage of SharePoint and OneDrive storage, for example. So if we wanted to facilitate a decision around backing up an Office 365 tenant, for example, we can fairly quickly from here establish, who is using the most storage, is it still currently being used, and ultimately, tidy up the tenant before we pay to back it up, before we pay for a migration, anything like that. I'll jump from here into Quantum for Azure. As you can see, it's kind of all within the same tenant. And again, we're using a development partner of ours, or the same development partner of ours, as a demonstration tenant. The upshot of that is they're not a particularly large organization, so some of the savings recommendations, etc., that we will see within Quantum for Azure are not enormous, but hopefully they will convey the activities that we are trying to perform, and ultimately a 10% saving is a 10% saving, whether you're spending £1,000 a month or £100,000 a month. Like Quantum for 365, Quantum for Azure is a very tag-based system. We very much encourage customers to go through and proactively tag their various Azure resources as much as possible to get as much value out of the system. And when we land in the overview screen here, tags are very much brought to the forefront. Most of the menu views here will have an overview tab, which tries to, I guess, assume what may be of interest and put it into these kind of tab-based views to surface information to you quickly to investigate. But behind all of them, there is also an analytics view where we can delve into much more detailed cut of the same information and kind of filter it as and how we need to. So we can filter by subscription or further down by tag, etc., to certain timeframes to understand where we're seeing changes in our cost in Azure. Going back to the tag-based system, though, for example, here we can see this particular tag UK system owner has seen a spike in cost of 9% in the last 30 days. So I may want to investigate why that is. And I should point out the tags will span any procurement method. So if you are transacting Azure via enterprise agreement, via legacy CSP, via Azure plan, etc., it doesn't really matter. Provided you tag those resources within Quantum, we can pull them together in the same view. So I want to investigate what this 9% increase in cost is. So if I click on the tag itself, it will take me to all of the services that have been tagged as System Owner UK. And here we can see all of the resources that have been tagged as such. And it doesn't matter whether we're looking at virtual machines, storage, anything can be kind of pulled into this grouping. Looking for something that jumps out here. Here we go. This particular resource previously cost 60p, suddenly has cost over £50 in the last 30 days. So definitely worth further investigation. And by clicking on that resource, I can see that it's a virtual machine. I can see the sort of the costings in pounds and pence, the usage metrics that will impact that. And if I scroll down, I can look at things like CPU activity, network in, network out, etc. So again, a lot of the data that we provide via Quantum can be used to inform far more technical decisions, not purely cost optimization, but that's where I'll focus today. Also from here, I can further tag this resource. So if I recognize that this is part of my HR system and I want to tag it as such, or quite simply that I want to put it on my watch list because it's seen a spike in cost, I don't need to sort of dip out into a further admin screen. I can sort of immediately apply a tag from here and then continue to monitor this resource as appropriate. The tool, again, from an Azure point of view, will provide a number of recommendations. So some of these are slightly more technical, although they will result in cost savings. So things like abandoned disks and right sizing recommendations about certain resources, virtual machines, etc. But for now, I'll just focus on things that Mel talked about earlier in this exact session. So reserved instances, the tool has recognized a number of candidates for a reserved instance. If I click on details here, I can then see the subscriptions in question, what the trigger condition is, i.e., why is it that this has been recognized as a candidate for a reserved instance, what the action is, so it's recommending a number of reservations be made against that particular subscription, which will result in savings of £152 a month. From here, this won't work for me because I'm not an Azure admin on this particular tenant, but from here I can click on, or a user would be able to click on View in Azure, and it will take them directly through to their Azure portal relevant to that subscription for them to enact that change and recognize that saving really rather quickly. Some of the other recommendations that the tool will make, there is also sort of a planning scheduler built into the tool. So as I mentioned earlier, everything we see here is read-only. You can't actually sort of power down a virtual machine or anything like that from within here. So there's no risk that in digging around, looking for savings, reporting on cross-charging or what have you, I can actually turn anything off. But what we can do is if the tool makes a recommendation, I can click Add to Plan. And then what that will do is add that particular job to my resource planner. So from here, I can build a task list and assign those tasks to the service desk or to whoever I need to in order to to ensure these, keep a track of these tasks, ensure they're carried out. I don't have to be sort of maintaining a significant spreadsheet or anything like that. In terms of our route to market for both versions of Quantum, both Azure and 365, the tools are available on a tool-only basis, whereby we will provide customers with a familiarization session so that they can begin to learn their way around the tool, provide them with their logins, and off they go. They are free to use the tool as much or as little as they require to act upon some of the savings recommendations and the other sort of data and telemetry that the tool provides. The majority of our customers, however, take these tools as part of a wider offering that we call Cloud Essentials. And what that involves is a number of scheduled sessions on a cadence with a Bytes licensing consultant, surfacing those reports to the customer, either on a monthly or quarterly basis, looking for some of the more niche savings or optimization opportunities that exist, and working through them with that customer to gain a better understanding of their environment. So to ensure that we are acting on savings where appropriate, and that if the tool recommends a saving that for one reason or another doesn't fit in with the customer's plans, that we ultimately get to know you and we don't kind of sit there repeating ourselves to a blue in the face, making irrelevant recommendations. What we would rather do is ensure that you as a customer are getting most value out of the tool. The wider Cloud Essentials offering is something that we've put together. I'm always keen to point out it's a new offering from Bytes, not a new service, which sounds very pedantic. But the reason I'm keen to point that out is actually what we are doing is taking a number of services that Bytes has a long pedigree of delivering and pulling them together in a way that makes them more accessible to customers to take the pain out of owning or operating a public cloud environment. So in terms of what we've just looked at from the Quantum tools, they provide the platform layer, the tooling, the telemetry and the metrics required to make decisions. And then on top of that, we can build in commercial optimization, which is the recommendations that Mel talked about around reserved instances, hybrid use benefits, profiling users to ensure that they are on the right level of subscription for them, removing accounts that don't need to be licensed, either by completely removing the account or moving it to a shared mailbox or doing whatever it is that we need to do to drive out costs. What we can also provide is technical optimization, particularly around the Azure environment. So making sure that resources are appropriately sized, appropriately spec'd. Things like geolocalized storage are interrogated to make sure that we're not kind of accepting or subject to costs that we don't need to be. And then from a support point of view, offering reactive and proactive support. So reactive support is your standard break fix. Something has fallen over. I need to speak to somebody with a degree of expertise to get it stood up again. That might be 3 in the morning. That's no problem. We can offer 24/7 support on a reactive basis. And proactive support being a range of managed or scheduled activities that we can provide to ensure optimal performance within your public cloud environment. So they may be things that we recognize from the offset that are required, managed patching, managed backup, etc., etc. But actually often a lot of the proactive support services and engagements that we deliver via Cloud Essentials actually come as a result of reactive support tickets. So as and when calls come in to assist our customers with fixing something that's broken, rather than kind of simply facilitating the fix and moving on, what we like to do is kind of collate that information and then over time make proactive recommendations back to that customer to say, actually, we believe there are a number of steps that we can take that will actually stop these issues repeating. So I guess working with that customer to gain a better understanding of their environment and ensure smoother operation. That in a nutshell is how we recommend customers go about optimizing the costs of their Microsoft environment, both in a 365 tenant and in Azure, and the tools that we can provide to assist customers doing so. I'm conscious that this Cloud Essentials offering is really quite broad in terms of the support offerings, the technical optimization, etc., and those elements sit somewhat outside of the remit of the conversations we're having today around, licensing bootcamp and licensing optimization. But we would welcome conversations around those other elements of running a cloud environment, if you see value in what we can bring to the table and how we may be able to better support you. But at this point, I guess I'll just open the floor to any questions based on anything I've talked about or anything that Mel covered off earlier, if anybody has any.
And then we do have one in the chat box from Kishan, who has asked, does this product show what's been installed on devices which are managed by Intune?
It does not, no. So the content toolset doesn't pull back any kind of inventory data from an endpoint machine. What it can do is see what's been activated via the click to run method. So one of the things we're keen to do via kind of the cost optimization service via Cloud Essentials is establish how far we can go with those optimizations. Often, so it will tell us if a user has or hasn't activated an application via click to run. That does not necessarily mean they are not using an application in any way, shape, or form. It's possible that that user is using, say, Office or Project via a Citrix server, via VDI, via some kind of shared activation, or an old 2016 MSI or something like that. We can't see immediately from within the tool. So what we are keen to do is use the tool to recognise areas of further investigation, and then work with organisations to understand what kind of other inventory sources they have to build a fuller view of I guess how far we can take those optimizations. And actually, on that note, a very key or a very common upshot of our engagements is almost how far is it sensible to optimize. I appreciate when you really get into the weeds, you can optimize, in inverted commas, everything to the nth degree. And what we will commonly see is we may approach an organization, or we may onboard an organization into Quantum who has a one-size-fits-all licensing suite or contract, and we can quite quickly establish that instead of going for a one-size-fits-all route, that there are savings to be had by profiling users and assigning them with appropriate subscriptions. And so quite often we may sit with an organization and say, by moving to these 3 user profiles, say, I don't know, advanced user, basic user, frontline worker, something like that, there are savings of 30% to be had, which most organizations would sit up and say, that sounds fantastic, let's do that. And then we can kind of really get into the weeds with Quantum and push further and say, actually, if we split those personas again, and you end up with a 6 profile agreement, the overall saving jumps to 32%. And far be it from me to make a decision on behalf of that customer, but most organizations at that point would say thanks but no thanks. You know, the additional overhead of managing a 6-profile agreement simply isn't worth that couple of percentage point saving, simply because we'd almost have to employ someone full-time to oversee it. But what it does empower that customer to do is make that decision from a position of understanding. And then if they're ever questioned in the future, you know, is there more we could do to drive cost out of our Microsoft arrangement? The answer is, well, yes, but you know, the returns are diminishing based on the actual effort or how far we would need to go to act on that.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, sorry, one more question regarding Quantum. How is that license? Is it a user license or is it just a one-off cost?
There's a slight difference between Quantum for Azure and Quantum 365. Quantum for Azure is available free of charge to any organization that transacts their Azure via Bytes. And then on top of that, you would then have access to a cost optimization service as an option if you wanted further assistance, if you sort of felt you didn't have maybe either the capability or in reality the resource to kind of act on everything that Quantum is providing. Quantum 365 is chargeable based on organization size. So what we've done is we've not quite mirrored Microsoft's enterprise agreement bands, but we've set a number of scaled bands based on organization size, because what we didn't want to do was be in a position whereby an organization with a certain number of users would sign up to use Quantum quite naturally in the first couple of months, scythe out a number of accounts and make the billing complicated. So Quantum 365 is from a tool only basis anyway, is priced on an annual subscription, which is relative to the size of the number of users. So if you'd like to find out more and how that relates to you as an organization, by all means, speak to your Bytes account manager, let them know that you attended this session, and they can arrange for us to catch up and sort of talk through options.
Thank you. We've had another question, Glenn, from David. He has asked, please could you repeat how it covers VDI sessions like Citrix?
Apologies, David, it does not. So short and sweet answer. No, what I was keen to point out is that Quantum can see if users have activated Office via the click to run method. What it won't do, or what we are always conscious of doing, is pointing out the limitations there. So if an organization is using Office via Citrix or VDI, or some kind of shared activation that we can't see from Quantum, what we are conscious of doing is not putting an automated report in the tool that says, this user's on E3, they could be on E1. This user's on E5, they could be on E3. There's a bit more to it than that. So the tool will provide the vast majority of the metrics, the telemetry required to make those decisions. But what we would always sort of urge customers to do is either speak directly to your Bytes account manager about what the tool is showing you, or if you are if you're kind of accessing the tool via our Cloud Essentials cost optimization service, we would be able to kind of point out where there are candidates for further investigation to establish where VDI or Citrix may be impacting what Quantum is showing us.
And David has asked again, are there any plans to look at agent deployment in the future?
As part of this Quantum toolset, no. As an organization, Bytes are kind of vendor agnostic. So when looking at wider software asset management engagements, we have a number of tools at our disposal, some of which are agent-based, some of which have been designed to provide recognition and license management as a back end to existing inventory tools that you have. So what we are kind of very well versed in doing, to a degree, is almost stepping back from the tooling. So if we are talking to an organization who wants better visibility and control over what's going on in an environment, and just for the sake of simplicity, we'll keep the conversation to Microsoft for now. What we almost want, the message we almost want to push is, it's not really a conversation about the tool, whether it's Snow, whether it's Quantum, whether it's SCCM, whether it's License Dashboard. It's really about the output. So as an organization, what do you need to know to make decisions, and how often do you need to know it? And then almost allow us to kind of build a platform or a series of tools that will provide all of the data points needed to make those decisions, and I guess aggregate and provide that reporting for you. So we have a number of customers who are using any number of tools to manage an on-premise environment, be they agent-based or not. then using Quantum in either flavor to manage either their Azure or their 365 environment. But then what we do as part of the Cloud Essentials cost optimization service is we kind of aggregate that data for them. So instead of having to log into multiple tools, which they are free to do if they kind of want ad hoc reporting, but what we will do is kind of provide them with a monthly or quarterly view of where they currently sit, what optimization recommendations we can make, almost regardless of how we came about that data, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud.
Great, thank you, Glenn. If there's no more questions, just a reminder that a poll has appeared on the screen. So if you wouldn't mind completing that, we'd be grateful. And just to say thank you very much for joining our session. Hope you found it useful. And obviously, if you do have any further questions, please do not hesitate to contact your Bytes account manager. Thank you very much.